reporters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador. I am Estefania Bravo, and this is From the South. Colombian authorities have confirmed the release of 6 soldiers by the National Liberation Army, or the ELN. The leftist group has said they were holding soldiers as part of the group's effort to restart peace talks with the new government. This comes a week after the ELN freed 3 other soldiers. The government of right-wing President Iván Duque has said the group must free 19 detained people before he will resume dialogue. The last round of the talks were held in Cuba early August. And a group of Colombian senators have visited former FARC combatants who are working to re-enter society. Despite their efforts, the former combatants have not received much of what was promised by the government.
Pablo Catatumbo, member of the Peace Commission, stated that the visit to Mira Vale revealed the lack of actions by the government despite the support received from the UN and countries like Norway.
The
state can't pass the responsibility to other nations. It is the government's responsibility to apply what they promise.
The senator of the FARC party said that the lands agreed upon in the peace treaties must not serve as confinement spaces and asked for an end to the lies about alleged disagreements between FARC high officials.
Iván hasn't quit the party nor the peace process. In fact, his letter was another sign of his compromise. These are just lies being spread by enemies of the peace process.
Other senators stated that the former combatants are committed to this project and highlighted the progress that has already been made.
This project is working, despite the government's lack of action towards peace. The productive projects developed here are really important for the whole region.
Senator Ivan Cepeda said that the state abandonment is just one of the main concerns for former FARC combatants and communities.
The state has not fulfilled its promises of social and economic reincorporation, of solving the judicial limbo of former combatants, who are very worried about how they will be treated by the Special Jurisdiction for Peace, and also feel insecure in the area after witnessing military operations there.
The Peace Commission will present a report to Congress regarding guarantees and security for former combatants. They will ask the government to enforce the peace agreements and to include productive projects for former combatants in the general national budget.
86 Venezuelan migrants are on their way home from Argentina. They are the latest of almost 3,000 Venezuelans who have been repatriated under the Return to the Homeland program. Many have criticized the poor living conditions and exploitation they faced while abroad.
Here I have worked since 8:30 in the morning until 10:30 in the evening. You are giving 1 hour for lunch and you work for 14 hours every day. I only had half Sunday to rest. I worked like this for 6-7 months.
It is hard because my initial plan was to bring my family, but then it gets hard, and at the end you need to choose between being a migrant or your family. So returning is the only way to be with them.
Our correspondent in Buenos Aires, Edgardo Esteban, has more.
86
Venezuelan citizens are returning home thanks to the Return to the Homeland plan. The initiative, boosted by President Nicolás Maduro, gives them the chance to return and overcome the difficult situation they have faced here in Argentina. They say they have suffered work exploitation and lack of health care. For that reason, the most affected Venezuelan citizens have been given priority in this first group that is returning. More Venezuelan citizens have signed up and are already registered in a waiting list. So far, around 1,000 people have registered. In this Venezuelan embassy, we have seen emotional moments of joy and hope. They have lived in uncertainty, and now they have the chance to start all over in their country.
Thank you, Edgardo, for your report. And labor unions and social groups continue their protest against the austerity measures of President Mauricio Macri. Thousands of people have blocked the main avenues of Buenos Aires. Protesters are angry about budget cuts in public services, which are severely affecting low-income Argentines. The inflation has risen to 31% and is still climbing. People have to pay more for transportation and electricity, as public utility subsidies have also been slashed.
It's an uncertainty to know day in, day out how you are going to get by, because it's getting worse. Every day you find yourself with worse things. Then you ask yourself, how can I feed my children today? What can I feed them tomorrow? If it continues like this, the truth is we are worse off every day.
Unionists in Argentina are holding massive protests against the ongoing financial crisis. Our correspondent, Sabrina Roth, explains.
On Wednesday, state workers are set to hold a national strike that will include mobilizations, roadblocks and countrywide gatherings to demand an end to the austerity policies established by President Mauricio Macri, which have worsened thanks to the deal the government made with the IMF. Unions announced they will march to the Treasury to demand an increase in wages to match protected inflation rates. Part of these projects is also calling attention to the issues of sovereignty, land exploitation and working conditions that several mines and nuclear power plants pose across the country, issues that have only worsened during Macri's administration.
Thank you, Sabrina, for your report. And a vigil was held in St. Lucia for Botham Jean, who was shot and killed in his Dallas, U.S. home. A female police officer allegedly mistook Jean's apartment for her own and thought he was an intruder. The officer was arrested on a manslaughter charge.
I felt that it was robbing St. Lucia, robbing the world of a leader, a God-fearing citizen, a positive soul, a gem.
Meanwhile, Venezuelan Vice President Delcy Rodriguez has met with the governor of the China Development Bank. They discussed projects and paid for by joint Venezuelan and Chinese funds.
Economic globalization and global governance are being attacked. Nonetheless, China and Venezuela have maintained trust, with the Venezuelan government supporting China in topics of great importance to us, like control of the Southern Sea. Meanwhile, China has supported Venezuela through a special arrangement when oil prices were low.
We recognize that Latin America must look to itself, but it must also foster wider relationships so we may go beyond being seen as the United States' backyard. We need relationships based on the respect of international rights. China agrees with this instance, with fostering cooperation against hegemony.
The Workers' Party in Brazil has a new presidential candidate less than a month to the presidential election. Our correspondent Andrea Vieira has the details in this report.
The Workers' Party handed over the presidential candidacy to Fernando Haddad. He will replace former President Luis Inácio Lula da Silva in the electoral race. Hundreds of people gathered in Curitiba to support Haddad and to protest the decision of the judiciary not to allow Lula run.
Haddad will continue Lula's project. He will build a better country for all of us, a country with public policies that takes into account the black community in universities, that brings back the housing project. He will promote policies to take care of us, different from the government of Michel Temer.
An act to denounce that Lula suffers a persecution process and that the justice of Brazil has not taken the honest decision to keep Lula da Silva as candidate. Through a letter read by one of the founders of the party, Lula indicated Haddad as his candidate.
No suppressor can be bigger than the people. That is why our ideas will reach everybody through the voice of the people, higher and louder than the lies of global. That is, I want to ask all of you that would vote for me, vote for Fernando Haddad for President of the Republic.
Fernando Haddad has reaffirmed Lula's innocence and called the PT and its militants win October's election.
It's time to go out to the streets with our heads held high and win this election. We're going to win this election for Lula, for the Workers' Party, and for the Communist Party of Brazil, for social movements and for Brazil. Brazil deserves this victory. We're not going to give up.
Social movements are now facing a new battle as they have to campaign in less than a month.
We are facing a historical moment and people know it. We work and fight for Brazil and connect our people to Latin America.
Haddad represents Lula, represents social movements, represents union movements. We are going to support this campaign. There is time to lose. We are going to vote for Haddad.
Fernando Haddad is now expected to build a popular project that gives power to the people. As Lula said, now the new presidential candidate will have to represent him and represent all Brazilians.
We'll be back very soon. Stay with us.
So yeah, national security is one of the most powerful notions in modern times to swindle, I think, people, to do things that are not in their best interest, and to support massive military complexes that are not in anybody's interest, but that are like cancers feeding on society, frankly.
Watch a series where the U.S. geopolitical strategies as an empire representing the culture of war and propaganda are shown, and how this has served as a tool of social control. Psy-War, Saturday, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. An island-wide state of emergency has been declared in Dominica from midnight, September 12th to noon on Friday, September 14th. A curfew will be in effect for the duration.
As a result, a big part of our preparation is a rather aggressive dredging campaign to clear our rivers and ravines. From last year into this year, we have done a significant amount of work in preparation for events like this. And as we all know, preparation is key.
Thousands of people from indigenous communities in Guatemala have taken to the streets. Demonstrators are protesting the decision of President Jimmy Morales to expel the International Commission Against Impunity from the country. They are saying this only protects pro-government forces and congressmen from the ruling party. 60 social movements have joined the protests. And more than 2,000 police and army have locked down the center of Guatemala City amid the protest. Demonstrators are denouncing Jimmy Morales' decision to deploy a section of elite soldiers of the army specialized for anti-terrorist operations. Our correspondent, Santiago Boton, explains.
30 to 40,000 people from the 48 areas of the Totonicapán region have been peacefully protesting against the government of Jimmy Morales, and especially against impunity and injustice. The peaceful protests are concentrating in at least 4 strategic points of the Inter-American Highway that connects the Guatemalan capital with the South Mexican border. During these latest days of protest, all the different groups have included their demands and joined together in calling for the resignation of Jimmy Morales and to advocate for the continuity of the International Commission Against Impunity in Guatemala.
Thank you, Santiago, for your information. And Chileans have paid tribute to the victims of the dictatorship with a memorial at the National Stadium in Santiago. They remembered the 45th anniversary of the military coup against late President Salvador Allende. The National Stadium became the main detention and torture center during the dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet. The 70-year-long regime left more than 3,200 dead and around 38,000 tortured.
As former prisoners, we have an ethical and moral duty to keep the memory alive and keep the record on everything that happened.
We have to remember. We have to remember something that hit us very hard in the country and is something too important in our history. We have to remember, and that's why I came here.
Fishing communities in Ecuador are the latest to be affected by the government's austerity measures. They are taking on an unfair share of the burden, while large corporations and multinationals stand to avoid paying penalties.
Ecuador's government has announced new diesel prices. The shrimp and fishing sector will see an increase in their diesel costs, in line with the government's austerity measures.
Diesel for the tuna and shrimp industry increased only 25 cents on its VAT For other fishing industries, there will only be a 10-cent increase. Those numbers will remain the same for the next 2 years.
For some analysts, the measure doesn't make sense because not everyone uses diesel. If they had really wanted to save money, they should have revised gas prices.
There might be speculation, and that is what the fish and shrimp industries are worried about. That will make them lose competitiveness. Those are exporting sector in Ecuador, as a dollarized economy, must support them. I don't understand why these subsidies aren't focused on the sectors that bring dollars to the country.
The government said they have spoken with the fishing sectors. However, local fishing sectors say this measure just benefits big industries and doesn't respect their work.
We haven't been part of any agreement to exchange an increase in gas prices for an extension of artisanal waters of over 800 nautical miles for industrial ships to sail without problem. I make this call because they are only bringing poverty to the fishing communities and artisanal fishing. They are allowing abuse against maritime resources.
In light of the recent economic measures implemented by President Lenin Moreno, several social and political sectors are calling for a demonstration on September 13. Denise Herrera, Telesur, Quito, Ecuador.
It has been 20 years since 5 Cuban citizens were arrested by the United States for spying. The group known as the Miami Five was convicted with a life sentence, but human rights organizations campaigned for the case to be appealed. By 2014, all of them were freed after a prisoner exchange agreement was reached between Cuba and the U.S. Street vendors in Cuba are bringing back the century-old tradition of the pregón. The pregón is the art of singing humorous and rhyming ditties about their products. This tradition has made a comeback with sounds such as reggaeton and electronic music. Cuba's pregoneros are positive their ditties are helping them stand out. Trinidad and Tobago could finally be adopting the Caribbean Court of Justice as its final court of appeal. Even though the CCG's headquarters is based in Trinidad, the country has long avoided even debating its adoption. Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley says that will change next year. Transporters in the Haitian province of Santiago have announced protest. They are angry about the rise of the fuel prices. Carriers also want the authorities to change the hydrocarbon law. Haitian President Jovenel Moïse congratulated tennis player Naomi Osaka for winning the U.S. Grand Slam. Via Twitter, Moïse said Osaka's win is a tennis triumph for Haiti. Congratulations and thank you to our Naomi who made us so proud, he wrote. Osaka's father is Haitian. The young athlete has always embraced her Haitian origins. 1 year after several earthquakes shook Mexico, reconstruction is still underway. Non-governmental organizations say corruption was part of the reasons of the damages. It also withholds public funds from people in need. Our correspondent, Eduardo Martinez, has more.
On September 19, 2017, the home of Cristina Leiva collapsed. A 7.1 magnitude earthquake destroyed everything their family had. 1 year later, they are living in an improvised home they built with wood.
We don't have the same comfort. With the rain, everything gets wet, everything. We have to sleep in a very small place.
East of the city, they learned that the land where their houses were built are at high risk. They still don't know whether there's a plan to relocate them or to improve their buildings. The help they have received is limited.
Our house fell in the earthquake. I used to rent my house. With that, I could pay everything and support my daughter, but now she is the only one who works.
A report published by the Mexicans Against Corruption and Impunity organization has gathered the stories of those who lost their lifelong belongings.
We learned about several irregularities regarding on how our house was built. After a year of the earthquake, we still continue to struggle.
The report also found a corruption network between authorities and construction companies. The earthquake left behind 369 people dead in the central and southern parts of the country.
With the documents linked to each property, it has become evident that the government ignored neighbors' complaints regarding the use of land, buildings without permits, or buildings that were damaged in the 1985 earthquake.
The investigation has also denounced that $140 million have been assigned to rebuilding the affected areas and that the victims are missing.
We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Welcome back. The United Nations has described the situation in Gaza as catastrophic after 11 years of economic siege. It also warns that Washington's decision to stop assistance to Palestinian refugees could create more misery.
If we compare to developing countries, we realize that we are creating in Palestine, and particularly in Gaza, conditions similar to those in lesser developed countries. It's like what is happening in Somalia, where there is lack of access to safe water. So, in a sense, we are economically isolating Gaza. This will prove extremely challenging to Palestine's development.
It is the responsibility of Israel and the responsibility of the international community to promote development in the occupied Palestinian territory. It's actually called for by the international law.
The European Parliament has voted for the first time ever to issue sanctions against Hungary after breaching democratic values. The vote was approved with more than two-thirds majority. The decision came after the EU Commission received a report citing allegations, including restriction of freedom of expression, press, and religion. Viktor Orban's government has violated rights of refugees, ethnic minorities, and students. We spoke to Hungarian lawyer Daniel Szabo about what will likely happen to Hungary now.
It's clearly more political than legal, but it was a historic vote. As I mentioned, never before voted the European Parliament that a member state violated the core European values, and in the political level it might result in lesser EU funds for Hungary, for example, or fewer positions for Hungarians in European institutions. So it would make Hungary an outlier in the European institutions.
Public gatherings in Zimbabwe's capital, Harare, have been banned due to a cholera outbreak. The infectious disease has killed 21 people in the city. Health Minister Obadia Moyo says more than 3,000 people have been infected with cholera in this latest outbreak. The previous one in 2008 claimed 4,000 lives. South Sudan's president has signed a peace deal with the rebel leader. He signed an agreement with the SPLMIO rebel group, ending a 5-year civil war. The conflict has killed at least 50,000 people, mostly civilians, and displaced about 2 million others. A previous peace deal was made in 2015 and fell apart one year later after fighting broke out between the government and the rebel groups. Liberia's president is making a surprise football comeback. Commander-in-Chief George Weah has dusted off his football boots. He played for his country in a 2-1 defeat to Nigeria. Weah was voted a European and African Footballer of the Year back in 1995. And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, as always, find them on our website at telesurtv.net/English. And also join us on social media, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.
Follow the most important